If you ask a fish about water, it probably won't know what you're talking about. Not because water isn't important, because water is everything. It's everywhere. It's so constant that it becomes invisible. The fish doesn't experience water as an environment, it experiences it as a reality. Humans have something similar, it's called culture. Not culture in the political sense, not culture in the headlines, the deeper kind, the invisible rules, the assumptions, the expectations, the things everyone around you treated as obvious, the ideas about success, the ideas about failure, the ideas about what makes someone valuable, what makes someone normal, what makes someone worthy. Most of us never question these things. For the same reason the fish never questions water. They were already there when we arrived, which raises an uncomfortable question. How much of your personality is actually yours? And how much of it is simply a high-resolution copy of the environment that raised you? Because the truth is that most people spend years trying to discover who they are, without realizing they're searching through layers of software they never consciously installed. Today we're looking at what I call the cultural operating system, how it gets installed, why it's so difficult to see, and how to find the parts of yourself that existed before the software was loaded. When you're a child, belonging matters more than authenticity. Not because children are weak, because children are smart. A child quickly learns something important. Certain behaviors create safety, others create rejection, certain opinions get rewarded, others create tension, certain emotions are welcomed, others are discouraged. So the brain adapts. It mirrors, not it copies. It absorbs. Not because it has carefully evaluated the information, because survival comes first. Imagine an invisible sculptor. Family, school, friends, teachers, media, culture. Every interaction removes a little material, adds a little material, shapes the edges, refines the image. Slowly, an identity begins forming. The strange thing is that we usually assume this identity is entirely ours, but much of it was assembled before we were capable of questioning it, because for most of human history, belonging wasn't optional. Being cast out from the group wasn't uncomfortable, it was dangerous, potentially fatal, which means your brain evolved to prioritize acceptance long before it prioritized self-expression. Your identity isn't just self-expression, it's a survival strategy. And understanding that changes everything. Most internal conflict begins when two versions of you start competing, the original self and the cultural ideal. The original self is curious, messy, unfinished. The cultural ideal is polished, acceptable, predictable. The original self asks, what do I actually want? The cultural ideal asks, what should I want? And for many people, those two answers are completely different. This is where the performance trap begins, because eventually you stop being yourself and start performing a version of yourself. The version that receives approval, the version that receives praise, the version that avoids criticism. At first, it's conscious, then it becomes automatic. Then something strange happens. You forget where the performance ends and where you begin. You've worn the mask for so long that it feels like skin. The dangerous part isn't pretending. The dangerous part is forgetting that you're pretending, because eventually the role becomes more familiar than the person underneath it. And that's why so many people feel disconnected from themselves without understanding why. They're living inside an identity optimized for approval, not authenticity. The turning point usually arrives when someone realizes something simple. Normal is not the same thing as healthy. Normal is simply common. That's all. It's a statistical average, nothing more, and averages don't automatically produce fulfillment. They don't automatically produce meaning. They don't automatically produce psychological health. Sometimes they produce conformity. Which brings us to the three layers of identity. The first layer is the persona, the mask, the version of yourself designed to navigate the world safely. This isn't necessarily fake, everyone has one. The professional version, the social version, the version that knows how to fit in. The second layer is the shadow, the parts of yourself that were judged, discouraged, rejected, the emotions you learned not to show, the interests you learned not to discuss, the qualities that made other people uncomfortable, so you buried them. Not because they were bad, because they were inconvenient. The shadow isn't evil. It's often just the collection of traits that didn't receive permission to exist. And beneath both of those layers is something deeper. The core. The temperament you arrived with. The natural curiosity. The instinctive interests. The parts of yourself that existed before you learned what was expected. Before you learned how to perform. Before you learned the script. Most people spend their lives strengthening the persona. A few eventually become curious about the shadow. But the real work begins when you start reconnecting with the core. So, how do you begin? The first step is a why audit, but not the normal version, a cultural version. Pick one belief you carry, something simple. I must always be productive. I must be successful. I must be liked. Then ask a question. Where did I hear this first? Not where you believe it, where you learned it. Because those are often very different places. Follow the trail backward, and you'll frequently discover that many of your strongest convictions aren't personal discoveries. They're inherited instructions. The second step is intentional discomfort. Small, harmless acts of social rebellion, nothing dramatic, nothing destructive, simply doing something that falls outside your usual script. Wearing something different, expressing an unpopular opinion, trying something you're not naturally good at. The purpose isn't rebellion. It's evidence that the world doesn't collapse when you stop following every rule you inherited. The third step is radical solitude. Time without an audience, no social feedback, no performance, no expectations, just observation. Because something interesting happens when nobody is watching. Certain parts of your personality disappear, others become stronger. And the version that emerges often tells you more about who you are than years of self-analysis ever could. Here's the truth. You didn't choose your starting point. None of us did. You didn't choose your family, your culture, your environment, your earliest programming, but you do choose your direction. And that's where responsibility begins. Deconditioning isn't about rejecting your culture. It's not about becoming rebellious for the sake of rebellion. It's about becoming conscious. It's about making sure you're driving the car and not the ghost of your third grade teacher or your parents or your peers or the expectations you inherited without questioning. Because the goal isn't to erase the software. The goal is to decide which parts deserve to stay and which parts are overdue for an update. So let me ask you something. What's one rule you grew up with that no longer fits who you are? What's one belief you've started questioning recently? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what kind of operating system updates you've been making. The hardware is original, the software is a suggestion, and I'll see you in the next video.